High Magistrate Vale monitored the secondary airlock from the observation deck. The dying star outside cast a sickly orange light across the reinforced glass. Vale's vaporous form swirled in a tight, agitated purple spiral within his containment suit. This was highly irregular. Commander Elias Vance placed a thin paper cylinder on the edge of the monitoring console before striking the lock sequence, stepping back smoothly as the heavy security doors slammed shut, sealing him in the corridor leading to the docking bays. The cylinder burned slowly. Ash formed perfectly at its tip. Vale ran the pressure diagnostics 3 times. The readings remained identical. Vance had deliberately locked himself out of the safe zone. Well, he had locked himself in the direct line of fire, which equated to the same biological outcome. To say this defied logic was an understatement. It defied basic preservation instincts. The human turned his back. I will confess something to you now. What that human did next ruined my understanding of survival entirely. The hostile armada had crossed the perimeter. Vale's internal vapor thinned rapidly, scattering against the interior of his visor until the glass grew opaque, a purely physiological fear response. He recalibrated his suit's pressure regulators. The sensors showed Vance's damaged rearguard vessel uncoupling from the station. The ship did not plot a retreat vector. It turned. It positioned its battered hull directly between the station's main habitation ring and the incoming fleet. Vale stared at the trajectory data. The human was going to know. Vale cleared his cognitive buffer and started the thought over. The human ship was establishing a fixed blockade point against 300 hostile signatures. Why would a solitary craft attempt to stall an armada when evacuation was mathematically impossible? The station's evacuation protocols initiated. They were utterly useless. Scylla physiology requires meticulous, multi-stage pressure equalization for transport, a process taking 6 standard cycles. The hostile fleet would be within firing range in exactly 4 minutes. Vale observed the evacuation timer flashing red. He felt a profound irritation regarding the color choice, focusing intently on the harsh hue while his physical form simultaneously lost cohesion in sheer terror. Vance's communications channel opened. The audio feed crackled with static. We'd offer surrender terms, but we forgot to write any. Vale processed the transmission. A joke. The human was making a joke. The armada opened fire. So the first kinetic slugs hit the rearguard vessel, and Vale is just watching the telemetry spike while noticing a greasy smudge on the reinforced glass. The human ship took the impacts directly on its reinforced forward plating, shuddering violently on the visual feed, which, given the sheer mass of the incoming projectiles, should have compromised the reactor containment almost immediately, yet the internal pressure logs remained completely stable. It held. Vale's containment suit cycled emergency repressurization gas to prevent his vapor from completely dissipating. The human was buying time. But for whom? The Exilith couldn't leave. The station was locked tight. The evacuation timer indicated a structural failure would occur within the secondary proximity alarm blared. The hostile cruisers stopped firing main batteries and deployed boarding pods. Dozens of them detached, streaking toward Vance's stationary ship like metal parasites. Vale documented this meticulously. If he survived, this record would either secure his promotion to the High Council or guarantee his execution for gross diplomatic failure. The paper cylinder on the console was half-ash now. It hadn't fallen. Vance's biotelemetry flared on the secondary monitors. He was inside the ship now, having used the manual umbilical. Vale expected the human to retreat to the fortified bridge. He did not. He sealed himself in the reactor control room. Breaching charges detonated. They were inside. The vibrations from the explosive charges transferred to the station's docking clamps. It was a subtle tremor. The structural dampeners absorbed most of the kinetic force, but the rhythmic shaking of the observation deck was, frankly, an annoyance I did not need. The internal sensors of the rearguard vessel painted a grim, if entirely predictable picture. 300 hostile signatures flooded the primary corridors. They ignored the armory. They bypassed the life support systems. They converged entirely on the reactor control room. which, given the circumstances, made no sense at all unless one understood that Commander Vance had deliberately lured them there. I adjusted my suit's pressure again. My internal vapor had compressed into a dense, terrified sphere near my primary cognitive core. It is a highly uncomfortable physiological state, comparable to severe indigestion in carbon-based life forms. The sheer volume of boarders should have overwhelmed the reinforced door in 60 seconds. They took 90. I found myself briefly impressed by the structural integrity of human metallurgy. The enemy was simply too numerous. The visual feed from the human ship's internal cameras showed a solid wave of armored bodies pressing against the final bulkhead. The door telemetry on the human ship flashed green. The breach was successful. The hostile signatures flooded the reactor room. I prepared to log a final casualty report for the human. It was a regrettable necessity before the station's inevitable destruction. I did not finish drafting the document. Vance did not fire a weapon. He opened a station-wide broadcast channel. We survived ourselves. Vance's voice echoed through the observation deck, entirely devoid of the panic standard biology dictates. You merely need to survive us. He did not overload the reactor. He manually disabled the internal kinetic dampeners. Then he detonated the ship's own spalling defense grid inward. It is a concept known in human engineering as hypervelocity spalling. When a high-mass kinetic projectile strikes external armor, the shock wave causes the interior wall to fragment, turning the inner hull itself into a storm of microscopic, lethal shrapnel. Vance did not wait for an external projectile. He turned his own internal bulkheads into a localized fragmentation bomb. The telemetry went entirely white. I noticed the diagnostic panel was missing a screw in the lower left quadrant. Maintenance is habitually negligent. All 300 hostile life signs inside the human vessel ceased to exist simultaneously. But that was not the primary objective. I realized this with a sudden drop in my suit's ambient pressure. The human had not failed to escape. The human had never intended to escape. By detonating the internal structure while the reactor was running at critical mass, he destabilized the core without vaporizing the hull, transforming the resulting cascade which tore the rearguard vessel apart into a million jagged, hyper-accelerated fragments into a permanent defensive barrier. An impassable, expanding debris field now floated between our station and the enemy armada, a shield made of his own ruin. The armada retreated. The station was secure. I walked to the secondary monitoring console to begin the official incident report. The paper cylinder had burned away. The ash remained perfectly balanced on the edge, untouched.